This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Every family has stories. Some are told around the dinner table, some are passed down in whispers, some are carried across oceans, surviving in memory long after people leave the places that they once called home. For many children of immigrants, these stories become a kind of inheritance, a way of knowing a homeland through someone else's memories. Today's guest has transformed that inheritance into poetry. New Haven writer Rohanna Ssanyu Delossantos' new chapbook, The Marabou Who Crossed the Sea, draws on her family's history in Uganda while exploring questions that resonate far beyond one's community. What do we preserve, or how do we preserve family histories and stories? What does it mean to belong to more than one place? And how does art help us make sense of identity across generations? This hour, a conversation about memory, migration, and the stories that shape who we become. Rohanna, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, mentioning your new chapbook, which is called The Marabou Who Crossed the Sea, which we are going to be talking about in a little bit. But before we do that, I would love to know more about your personal story. So can you introduce yourself to us? Tell us about growing up between cultures and how you eventually found your way to Connecticut.
So my name is Rohanna Ssanyu. Hello, everyone. So I grew up, for the most part, in Connecticut from almost 7 years old onward. And I continue to live here. I think I'll live here for the foreseeable future. But I was actually born in Alaska. My mom moved to Alaska, to Fairbanks specifically, which is about 8 hours north of Anchorage. So a big state, a long drive, and even longer to Uganda in a boat. And so she ended up coming to the United States as an au pair, sort of. And my dad was up in Alaska working on his PhD. And they were up there for about 13 years, and I was born about halfway in their time there. And when my father finished his PhD, he's an ecologist, we moved down to Connecticut because that's where he was offered a position. And I have lived here ever since, with a few hiatuses, living in various places, including Uganda for just a moment. And I've been here ever since.
Do you know why your mother made the decision to leave Uganda?
So there was this opportunity that was given to offered to the family through a family connection in Alaska. And I know this sounds random, and all of this is real, I promise. It was originally offered to her cousin, who ended up declining because she had fallen in love with a Canadian. And so my mom was offered this opportunity. Why her over other siblings? I don't know the answer to that. That's for my next research in the family. And so she took it, and she worked for a family. She was a nanny for 2 young boys. She did that job for maybe a year and a half or so. It didn't end up being everything she had wanted it to be, and she ended up marrying my father when they were relatively young. They were in their young 20s. And that allowed her to stay in the country. She had, in that year and a half that she originally came to Alaska, she had wanted to go home. And my mother has since shared with me that she had written, or called, probably written, to her mother and said she wanted to return, and her mother had discouraged her from returning and asked her to stay put, which is a moment in my family's history that I thought a lot about as I was writing The Marabou Who Crossed the Sea. Because ultimately, I exist because of that message that my grandmother had sent. And eventually my mother found her footing and fell in love. My parents have been married for over 40 years. They're still married today. And it all started with a small meeting. My mom was drinking a Coke, and now they've been married for a very long time. So I wonder sometimes what would have happened had my grandmother encouraged her otherwise.
And I wonder if that's a conversation that, or I imagine it's a conversation that many people have with their families if your native country is not the U.S. and if you're here for opportunity or for whatever reason. And I often hear from friends and family too. There seems to be no middle ground. It's always you should stay there or you should come back. I don't think I've ever really heard anyone being given the option. So I'm curious, I want to hear more about your mother and father growing up in very different communities and cultures and how you sort of navigate through those different dynamics. But as you're wondering that conversation between your grandmother and your mother, has anything changed over the years, especially writing your family stories and researching your family stories?
So we were so far away from our extended family that the culture was really our household culture. And when you are part of a family with various ethnic backgrounds or cultural backgrounds, racial backgrounds, that what's happening within the house is the most important piece. And that was it. That was our culture. So my understanding of everything that was happening or who we were outside of that at first basement apartment that was owned by my mom's employer. She eventually went on after being a nanny to working at a school, a Montessori school, and then became a nanny again when I was born. And so she was a nanny for the principal of the local high school. And they gave us subsidized housing while my dad was in his PhD. So that basement apartment in which we lived, that was my culture with visitors. So even up in Fairbanks, we did have the family on my father's side. He's originally from Missouri, the Missouri-Oklahoma line. And we would occasionally have visitors from that part of who we were come up and kind of be guests into our lives. And then I had two uncles who were living in the United States when my mom came here originally. And so I believe both of those uncles came up at some point. An aunt who had that point moved to England came to visit us in Fairbanks. And my grandmother, even, there's pictures of her when I was a baby. She had went on this grand tour. It was on that trip the first time she wore pants. There's pictures to document it. And she came to visit as well. And so I was not aware of what our culture was outside of this space that we had created for ourselves and those visits until we moved. And we packed up a U-Haul and drove across the continent over 2 weeks. And this brought us to Connecticut in 1996. And also I'm growing up, so I'm starting to see that there's this space outside of us. And we're also moving into a community that has a different cultural norm. And so now in Connecticut, both my mother and my father are feeling to me as being other. And so, yeah, yeah.
So a lot of moving parts, clearly. A lot of moving parts, a lot of family members kind of in and out of your household, whatever your household is, whether it's a basement apartment in Alaska or here in Connecticut and wherever else that you have lived in. And I wonder, do you remember when did you start thinking about how your parents' different communities and cultures came into play in terms of how you were raised?
Yeah. In the way that it's, as a young child, it's who I'm asking questions to, right? Mm-hmm. It's when I, for a very long time, I would speak to my father primarily, I would say, when asking him to interpret, say yes to this American childhood things of a sleepover or going out or this and that it was just hard for my mom to understand what I was asking for or to buy an extra, the snack that my friends like because right. This, so I often turned to him. It's as I age, not when I was a child, that I turned to my mother for for other things. She takes care of my children often, and there's this understanding that as a grandmother, as a Jaja, that there's this role, not that she has to take it, but it's something that there's a purpose to it. There's a need. Childcare is expensive, and there's this cultural norm that we both are adhering to. I didn't realize we would do this, but it seems to be where we're falling, and I'm so appreciative for it because I don't have to ask her. My grandmother, raised many of my cousins, not the Americans. We didn't have time there like the other cousins did. But those who had childhoods in Uganda, many of them spent quite a bit of time with my grandmother. And I don't think that every household in this country assumes that will happen or has that structure in place for that to happen easily. And although my mom is a professional social worker and kind of transitioning into retirement, she's had a professional life. There's still these cultural norms that I very much appreciate. They're saving my family right now.
Well, and I think that's part of what we're talking about today is to have the different knowledge that really enriches your life in ways that I will never be able to understand, but I appreciate it because I have a similar experience in terms of straddling various cultures while being in one place. And you mentioning that, you go to your father for certain information, you go to your mother for certain information, and a lot of your cousins have had your grandmother in their lives in ways that you did not. And so I'm wondering, because you've said before that the Ugandan diaspora here in Connecticut is relatively small, but you have found community in New Haven. So what has that experience been like, sort of being able to find people who understand pieces of your story while also building a home yourself at a place that's different from where your own family had began?
Sure. Now, I would say in terms of the Ugandan diaspora, I find that is a community I am only getting to know. The newer folks that are coming, now there's the aunties that I grew up around who my mom connected to. Every time she had any inkling, if she thought this person was East African, she would start there, are you East African? And then go from there and go there until she found her people. But newer arrivals, or, I'm still getting to know them. There's a Ugandan picnic coming up in the middle of the state at the end of the month. I'm looking forward to meeting some new faces and getting to know them. I think as a second-gen immigrant, sometimes relationships can grow stale because we expect our parents to maintain them for us. And I'm realizing that I want to actively participate in building these relationships. I have to talk, Sure. It can't just be my mom or, filling in those gaps. But what I find in terms of community in the New Haven area and in Connecticut in general is other second-gen folks. I'm actually married to a second-gen person whose parents are from the Dominican Republic. That's where Delossantos comes from. And I find that is a community that I can connect to very, very quickly. The Ugandan community in Connecticut is relatively small. The African immigrants are still small in comparison to other immigrant groups, but significant. There's a sizable Congolese community in the Bridgeport area. West Haven has the Liberians of West Haven and other groups. And I teach at adult education in New Haven, and we have many people from Guinea and Togo and et cetera. And so those are the communities, those are the folks that I find myself connecting to, that I'm drawn to in this book project. And we're finding many commonalities. Sometimes it's even easier to build a community with folks that you don't feel the pressure to perform for. And I wish that weren't the case, but that's the honest answer, that sometimes when within the finite community, there's, you start testing each other. Do you speak? Can you greet? I would like to think that pressure is not as relevant for, people of a comparable age. But that has been largely my experience as a second gen. And so I'm like, as an adult, coming back to this community and starting not over, but trying again, because I had stepped away, I think, for a lot of my the last decade or so.
Well, I think everything you just described, I would think it resonates with a lot of people, especially finding community, I think, is already difficult enough and challenging enough, let alone you have a lot of nuance and context according to culture, right? And even within a culture, there's multitudes within that we have to navigate, right? And analyze, I think, as you're going. And I've shared this anecdote before on air where as you were describing your mom, kind of like if she's pinpointing certain people, like, oh, are you East African? I'm starting to realize I'm that creeper that if I hear a semblance of a Taiwanese accent, I'm like, oh my God, where are you at? Where you live? Can I hang out with you? But I understand it to a certain standpoint because I'm Taiwanese American, and the Taiwanese community here in Connecticut is also very small, but it's also very robust. And I have met many of them, and it has enriched my life in so many ways I never expected. And I've talked about this before too, where I did not expect to find that in Connecticut. And so there's something really wonderful about that. And as I continue to meet more within my community and outside of it, it's a hopeful thing, I think, to sort of ride on as you're trying to figure out yourself, you're figuring out your culture and your family. And so I sort of want to turn into your new book of poetry because you write about this exact thing. It's called The Marabou Who Crossed the Sea. So tell us more about the stories that you're telling through these poems, and why did you decide to share your life story and sort of family journey through poetry?
I didn't mean to.
That oftentimes happens that way.
Answer. I got an MFA at Albertus Magnus College, finishing in 2023, and went in with a focus in nonfiction. I am someone who writes essays, and then someone will say, that's a great poem. And I'll say, what are you talking about? It was an essay. But I ended up focusing in poetry and then nonfiction being secondary. And I found that in family history, which is what I wanted to say, that was what was at the tip of my tongue, that, excuse me, that in a family history that has gaps, poetry is the best vehicle in which to tell the story. Yeah.
And I think you have that. You were going to read the poem for us today.
Yes, absolutely. Should I go ahead?
Go for it.
Okay. So this first poem is called Marabou. The smell of burning plastic heat. A city waking heard in horns. A stork who has moved into town. An appetite for human trash. The marabou who crossed the sea. A tale for her bazookuloo. She spreads her arms, her fingers splay, her eyes widen, clouded in time. Skeletal legs, an ink block held to cloud, a grainy beak, pink flesh, a nape of hair, a head splattered in orange blood, a sky. And its undertaker, the stork, follows vultures, snacks on the dead. Her voice drops low, the children still. And when the day will be hot, felt in warm concrete at dawn, the scent of gasoline, look up.
And for anyone unfamiliar, what is a marabou? Can you paint a picture for us?
Well, number one, you should look up a picture of the marabou because I could never paint a picture.
I absolutely did, and I agree. Definitely should look it up.
And I've started to bring a photo with me so that people, because you have to see it. But it's about my height, which is I'm 5'2", and so a marabou is just a little bit shorter, usually with a very large wingspan. And its most prominent feature is its neck. It has this fleshy pink, kind of hairy gullet that hangs from below its neck. It's not always out, but when it is, you see it. And it has, like the poem is describing, this like caked legs and feathers that look out of place, and a beak that is almost looks scratched, like concrete that has been damaged. It's at the top of its head is like just little bits of hair. It looks like something that is rotten.
I think my first reaction was you clearly see where dinosaurs came from.
Yes, I agree.
It's like this gigantic stork.
Yes.
Right. Why the marabou?
It is an animal that I was confronted with when I first went to Uganda 16 years ago. And I didn't know anything about it. It wasn't something that was really shown in pop culture. It's there, but not in the way it really looks. Just like my book cover, I didn't want to scare people with the full image. But in the city, now the marabou come originally from the savannah, but they've migrated like so many animals into urban spaces where they can follow food sources, and they snack on rats and they eat garbage. In the wild, they're eating. They're coming in after the vultures and eating the leftovers and breaking down what's there. So they're also eating what is deemed dirty in the city, and you see them like a pigeon or a seagull walking around on the street. You see them nesting on poles, and just because of their size and the fact that they usually are not alone. They're usually with other marabou. They're a presence everywhere you go. And as I was writing in this MFA program, the image of a marabou just kept coming back to me, and it found itself into many poems. And then once I started placing the marabou in some poems, I said, let me see if I can work a marabou in many of them. And so when I pitched this book project to Small Harbor Publishing, who picked it up, it had come from a much larger collection that had to do with empire, and that's where I would like to focus my writing in a future larger project. But I went through it and I realized that I had written marabous into so many, or birds in general, into so many poems that I was like, I have a marabou collection here. I need to pull this out. And to me, the marabou is confronts the reader with this comparison between beauty and ugliness. And so I started looking through this larger project for that kind of that concept as well, and I found 51 pages worth of poems that were related to this idea. And so the marabou terrifies me, and I also appreciate it. I really grew to love the marabou, and I have found myself like watching videos of the marabou and the sounds that they make, and this animal that just shocked me at first. It doesn't shock me anymore.
Well, I love that. And we'll be coming back after the break and to talk more about that juxtaposition between beauty and ugliness. Unless you're me, though, when I first looked up a photo of a marabou, I was like, oh, cool. I can't wait to talk to her about this, which we'll be doing more after a quick break.
Wonderful.
So we're going to be talking about how we all inherit stories about the places and people that came before us. But memories, of course, aren't static. They change, they're edited, and they're deeply personal. So we'll hear about how Connecticut poet Rohanna Ssanyu Delossantos has channeled the fickleness of memory into her art and perhaps the marabou. Stay with us. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. This hour, we're talking with New Haven poet Rohanna Ssanyu Delossantos about memory, family, and what it means to inherit a homeland through someone else's stories. So your chapbook actually opens with a quote from Warsan Shire, who is a British Somali poet. Mm-hmm. And she says, I am the sin of memory and the absence of memory. Why begin there?
So that poem comes from the collection Teaching My Mother How to Give Birth. And it's one that has meant a lot to me over the during my adulthood. I actually brought it with me when I gave birth to my daughter. It was the only thing I brought with me. For a few reasons it means so much. It's a chapbook, and I like poetry in short form. Maybe it's because I'm a mom and my kids are, if they could, they would be here right now pulling out my books in front of me. So I appreciate the format of the book and that she expresses herself in such a fine collection. But I scoured through this collection to look for a quote that spoke to my project, and this is the one I found. I find that the second generation is stuck in this space of and let me read that quote one more time. I am the sin of memory in the absence of memory. The second generation remembers and then also is losing memory. And I find that this is a very particular relationship with the original culture. Will the third generation completely lose it? Maybe. Maybe they want to forget. Now, I know that Warsan is not identical to me, and I'm not claiming that she is. But I thought it was interesting that there's already a concern about a loss. And the poem that quote comes from is describing, I think, multiple perspectives within a detention center. And so here are this group of immigrants, presumably, who are all expressing this, describing this difficult space and expressing already this feeling of loss. The second generation feels it more, I think, or differently. And we are at times discredited for both remembering and losing. And I wanted that tension to be relevant to the collection.
Well, so many thoughts as you were talking, but two things that really pop into my mind was I don't think I've heard stories about Taiwan in my first sort of memory, but I remember the language. So I grew up in a multilingual family, so I think I heard the language first before I became aware of stories. And as you're talking about, I feel like with second gen, third gen, fourth, you're sort of you're trying to live in the present or the present, but you're experiencing loss at the same time. So it's a little like running on quicksand. I feel like that's how I describe the experience. So how does what goes through your mind when you're hearing about a place that's different from living here? And it's from your mother's stories. And you also lived in Uganda for a little bit, very quickly.
For a moment.
For a moment. So how did that moment change or shape your own imagination? Or memory, I suppose.
It was, I like to bring back the idea of quicksand. We're running against time and people who are still with us. And so that's what I felt like I was doing. I felt like I was running to Uganda before my grandmother passed away. And she actually passed within the year that I was there. And so we're trying to find a space that resembles the location that our parents told us about. And that moves with time. I think home is a period of time more than anything. Come hit me with another question.
Well, actually, I was just thinking because you were in Uganda for a moment. I was in Taiwan for a longer moment, but that place that I lived in is also no longer the same place it is now. So I recently was able to visit, and it's such a different place. Or am I a different person, or is it a mix of both? That's very meta. We can get into.
I like meta conversations.
But when you were in Uganda for the first time, you were in your 20s.
I was in my 20s.
What surprised you? Did it feel familiar, foreign, both?
I mean, I was a foreigner, and that was made clear to me very quickly. And there's always a word in most cultures that describes some kind of foreigner or outsider. And Luganda, it's Mzungu. And so that is literally, it can mean a white person, it could mean a foreigner, it could mean an outsider, it could mean a stranger. And it's this concept of stranger that I really stuck with.
So they can always point me out like I'm a short thumb.
Yes. And I'm mixed, so obviously I look different. And that is, going to be the first thing that signifies me. But that was immediately clear to me that I belonged, but I didn't belong. However, at the same time, we'd be I was with a group of students during that time, and we would be traveling, and I would hear a song on the radio that I know my mom played me on a CD in her car, and I could sing along or I can hum to the beat, and I might not have known every word, but I could hit that chorus, and I was, and I was humming along, and these other students were not doing that, and so there's a sense of belonging in that, and so going there was this constant comparison, like the Marabou, between an ugliness and an inconveniences and a beauty of feeling like I belong, but then also feeling like I could never belong to someone's memories from the 1970s and the 1980s because I'm here in the 21st century and this place has changed. It's a living, breathing space. The city is much more populated than it was when my mother was growing up there. There's approximately 2 million people living in that city. And that does not include the area surrounding, right? So it's just a very big place. And of course it was when she was growing up, but it has changed. If I dropped into Fairbanks, Alaska, where I was born, in 2026 and brought my kids and tried to go to, back to, I couldn't, if I was at the airport and I had to tell the Uber to bring me to my old house, that basement apartment, I don't know how to get there. I don't even know if I know the address anymore. Mm-hmm. And when we make those comparisons, of course it was distinctly different than these memories and it was jarring. We wish, I think as second gen, that a place can just float in time forever and that we can hop into it when we are able to hop into it. And that's even an option for us. And it's not. And the tragedy of that is what this book explores. Yeah.
When one of your poems, you explore exactly that tension. It's called Turning Self into Uganda Girl. Can you read it for us?
Sure. Good segue.
And tell us more about it after you're done.
Yes, of course. If I can find it here.
Well, as you're looking for it, maybe you can tell us first, what was you kind of told us the inspiration of writing it, but do you remember the moment you were like, I have to write this poem?
I mean, you can see that there's some poems in this collection that were written in a sarcastic.
We love some sarcasm.
There's deep sarcasm.
There's not enough sarcasm in poetry.
I agree, and nor in this world. And I'm trying to just bring it. I'm just trying to bring it, And there was a party. I'm going to tell you about this party. In Connecticut. There's a whole handful of African groups that will come together for this and that Christmas party and a summer picnic and this and that. And this was, I believe, a gala, a Christmas gala. And I was dancing and having a good time. I was wearing a basuti. I looked Ugandan. I put on the show. And I was dancing. My sister was there. My mom was there. My son was there. And an auntie came up to me and said, wow, your son can really dance. It must have skipped a generation. And I was like, I was just having a good time.
Wow, yeah.
No one needed to say that. I was just trying with my two-step and my father's hips, and I was just trying really hard. And so those moments like that, which provides material for sarcastic poems later, and I do appreciate Auntie for that moment. And when I say Auntie, I speak generally here. And so the Auntie of this poem is a symbolic of a generation, I think, and the people that I was taught to respect, and I respect very much. I've learned from, and I also sometimes have some feelings. So notes on turning self into Muganda girl. I crave Luganda and stuff myself with words at night when no one can stop me. Sugary words like kabalagala that get stuck on my tongue. Wash them down with mango seltzer. So when Auntie asks me, do you speak? I can burp out a few, or cry them onto my cheeks, or cough them into her hands. Auntie finds my language distasteful. So I invite her to sit on my uncovered couch and serve her lemongrass tea a decade old. I fall to my knees. I speak nonsense to her. Regurgitated words. Sticky. Auntie scrunches her nose and tells me, just speak in English. So I curse her in Spanish.
right? So sprinkle of sarcasm there for sure. Well, and you were talking about earlier when you say auntie, you mean sort of globally, and a lot of
Yes.
cultures share that representation.
I would never speak of this way to my actual auntie. Don't worry.
And so, tell us more about that dynamic, because it's very familiar for many people.
Yeah. We're something that I think I relate to many second gen folks on is this respect of elder and this prize of these folks who have experienced things firsthand. And so because they are the original source, we are raised to truly respect the generation of migrants who came to the U.S. at a particular time. And an auntie, I think, is that person. I would call an auntie, I would say this of a friend's parent as well, of a particular generation. This is a group of people that we have been raised to respect. That community is also aging, right? And I think we have an obligation to continue to respect, but also step up and carry some of these stories now for this next generation.
Well, if this helps you or makes you feel better, I did have an auntie myself that told my mom, "You've got a mouthy one there."
Ooh, congratulations.
Listen, I host a talk show now, so big shock.
Like that has led to you being very successful.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
I love
Thank
that.
you for your kind words.
Yeah.
So, so throughout this collection, and kind of building on what you were just sharing, there is a thread, I think, of daughters trying to understand their mothers, and you've become a mother
I have.
since then. So, has becoming a mother changed how you think about memory and the stories that you leave or tell your own family?
I feel pressed for time. I feel that I understand. I'm a history teacher professionally, and I understand that generations only overlap for so long. And I'm in this moment, this special moment. I'm lucky that my parents are living, and most of my mother's siblings are still alive, and not all of the Jajas, the grandparents' generation still is, but some of them are. And so and I have children who are now old enough to gather some of their own memories. And so this moment's not going to last long. And how do I both start collecting stories and also allow some firsthand experiences for my children? I would love to bring my kids to Kampala. It's not as easy as it once was because the family living there, some are no longer with us. You have to renegotiate relationships and figuring out where you're going to stay and who's driving you from the airport, who is feeding you, who do we have to visit, are we going as tourists and touring around the natural beauty of the country, which is very beautiful? Are we going to be in auntie's living rooms? And so that can be very overwhelming, I think, for the second gen, like navigating that. And we turn to our parents, like, please help us to be the one who makes our itinerary and does this, because that's what it was for us, for so many of us when we were children.
Sure.
Our parents are the ones that told you which cousins to hang out with, which ones not to hang out with, where you're going to be, when you're coming back to grandma's house, We're part of we are now needing to make those decisions for ourselves.
You've been listening to New Haven poet and author of The Marabou Who Crossed the Sea, Rohanna Ssanyu Delossantos. And by the way, you have a chance to meet Rohanna. She'll be reading from the collection at the Party Morris House in New Haven on Sunday, August 9th. And after the break, we dig into why poetry became the language for these stories and why everyone has stories worth telling. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. We're back with poet Rohanna Ssanyu Delossantos and talking about her new chapbook, The Marabou Who Crossed the Sea, and about the ways poetry can preserve memory, family history, and identity. So earlier you talked a little bit about why you chose poetry to sort of tell your stories, and your poems also often blur memory, imagination, and history. So can you tell us more about why poetry was the right form to do all of that instead of a memoir or nonfiction?
Because I'm still in the process of chasing these stories. Mm-hmm. And so I found that poetry was, I find poetry to be like an explosion of energy or an explosion of emotion. And I was ready to put that on paper now. I think that I would like to dive deeper and to get more historical context for these stories. And if I were to write a memoir or a longer form piece, I need more time. I also need my children to both be in school so that I'm not watching my 2-year-old during the summer, because that's real. So I had to get these things on paper. I had just reached an age where I need to start documenting these things. And I felt that pressure. My son, who's a little older, was starting to ask questions, and I needed a reason to start asking my mother these questions, to start reaching out to my family, and I couldn't ask in the same way I could as a child, right? Mm-hmm. You can ask silly questions that can be turned into, being called silly and excused when you're young. But as you get older, it's harder to have those conversations. And so a book project as a good immigrant child was like the way that I decided to make that happen. And so it was a format to be able to speak on these memories, to process these memories that my mom had been sharing with me and that I was starting to process for my own child. And then there's gaps in the stories, or there's moments I realize as I'm digging through these memories that there are holes or things have changed, and if something doesn't quite line up, or I just don't understand something. And so a poem allowed me to still say it and play with it or fictionalize it, so that maybe this is possible, or maybe this is simply a memory and it is wrong, but it is true because it's what this person remembers. I thought it was interesting that many of the memories I referenced in this poem are my mom's childhood memories. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to dig through someone. I mean, the way I remember my childhood is incorrect, or I'm fixated on something that maybe was actually quite small, or it's really an expression of feeling or fear. And there was certainly a lot of feelings of fear or uncertainty that my mom experienced when she was a child in the 70s in Uganda under Idi Amin. And the times after that, as a teenager, she's trying to find who she is. I mean, she was living in Uganda during the first 20 years of its existence as an independent state post-colonialism. And so this is just a complicated time to live in a space. So the country is a child. Also, it's little. We're not just talking about an ancient kingdom, which is what Uganda was comprised of before. Many indigenous populations in their ancient cultures, yes. But now we're talking about an independent state. And so here's this country that is trying to find itself, and a girl trying to find herself, and remembers this in particular ways, and the country is remembering itself in particular ways. And as a poet in the United States, only hearing through the lines of poetry, or the lines of memory, poems, were the best way I could put that on paper.
Well, thanks for bringing that back to here in the sort of the present day, because I was just thinking, as you're talking about all of that, it's amazing that we're having this conversation years later about a different country, but very much a part of yourself, part of people who live here. And I mean, hence the title of the show, Where We Live. It's very much influential, our past going into our present. Does your mom welcome those questions? Does she like or want to talk to you about those stories?
Yeah, I think it gives her an avenue to process as well. She has been more receptive to my questions than I anticipated. More receptive to, I check in with her. Hey, Mom, I'm going to use your picture from when you were 8 or 9. Is that okay? And she'll say, yes. I want to be known. Like, I want to be remembered. And I really look up to her for that, because it's not easy to to have your child dig into you,
Sure.
that's not an easy thing.
Well, and I often wonder too, with our generation, or when I say our, the new generation on, we have the language to express how we feel or to frame those questions where I think our parents or our grandparents or anyone from the previous generations may not have the language or the space to explore all of that. So we have a couple minutes left here, but I do want to sort of end where we began with home. So after writing this collection, has your understanding of home changed?
I referenced this a little earlier, and I should have saved it. I realize that now.
That's okay. There's more to talk about.
That when I teach in a history classroom, I ask students, where is home? And I ask, who is home? And I find that those two answers say so much about, I get so much out of those answers. And I have been considering when is home as a third question. And that is what this collection explores, is home is a time. And I think of my own childhood home, which I grew up, once we moved to Connecticut, we eventually bought a home outside of Danbury. And my parents still live in that home, and it feels the same and it doesn't feel the same. And I realize home will always be the time where I'm there with my parents are younger and my sister is there and our old dog is there, and it's the sounds of 2004 and my punk rock music I was listening to and that is gonna be home to me always. And now home sounds different, but it sounds like my house where I live now, and it's the sound of my kids, and it's the sound of my current dog, and my husband making me coffee in the morning, and that's fine. Time changes what home is.
Well, and we of course are talking about your specific experience and my specific experience, but have you heard from other people who have read the poems or who have learned about your story and they resonated? And they're not from Uganda. They're not from Alaska.
Yeah, I have a very good friend who sat at my dining table, and she is her immigrant family passes as many generations back, and so this is not the friend I thought would hit the most, but she just had the biggest emotional response to these poems, and because I think home is universal, and I think our mothers are universal, and wanting to remember them speaks across lines in time and culture and ethnicity, and that was a beautiful thing to see.
And just really quickly, 30 seconds, you do have an event coming up. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. It's at Party Morris House in New Haven. It's owned and operated by the New Haven Museum. I'll be August 9th at 2 p.m., and we're going to be doing art and poetry. I'll be reading from my book, and also doing some drawing response. It's child-friendly, so please bring your families.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. You've been listening to New Haven poet Rohanna Ssanyu Delossantos, whose new chapbook is called The Marabou Who Crossed the Sea. Rohanna, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your stories with us.
Thank you, you all.
And again, she'll be reading from the collection and leading a family art activity at the Party Morris House in New Haven on Sunday, August 9th. We'll have more information on our website that you can check out, ctpublic.org/where we live. I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Chloe Wynn. Our technical producer is Jean Amatrida. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And thank you all so much for listening.